So in my video recently around parallel processing in the quad Cortex, I came across a setting on the splitter that I wasn't really familiar with, and that's the crossover type of the splitter. Basically what this is doing is splitting the signal not based on left, right, or just evenly. It's splitting it based on frequency and sending lower frequencies to one path and then the upper frequencies to another. And someone had posted a comment saying that that can be useful for sending the bass frequencies to one amp that maybe can handle those better without getting mushy, and then sending the upper frequencies to another amp maybe that has a little higher gain on it. So I wanted to play around with this a little bit and create a preset that played with it. So our preset here is pretty straightforward. I've got a couple overdrive pedals. I've got the Blues Breaker and the OD1, frankly for no other reason that I don't use these very often, and I wanted to use something different. We've got our amps and cabs. We'll go through those in a second. I've got a little bit of a high cut going on. Again, just smooth out the top end. We've got some compression here just to even out some of the volumes when you push the front of the amps a little more. I've got a basic tape delay running into a hall reverb. So for the amps, what I wanted to do was I wanted to pick an amp for the low frequencies that could handle that low end without getting muddy. And the one I ended up using is the Soldano Crunch Bright. And then for the upper frequencies, I wanted something that had a little bit more of a rounded top end to it. And so what I ended up using was a Fender Twin with a bright switch off. And then each of these is running into a 4x12 cabinet. I think they're slightly different, but they're both the Mesa V30s. I've just got the different versions of them just for some variation. So the two amps together, again, we're splitting based on frequency. And so everything below this 562 hertz is running into the Soldano. Everything above it's going into the Fender. And so if we were running just with a balance split, the two together would sound like this. Which I think sounds good, and I like that. But I wanted to play around with the crossovers. So let's turn that on, and it sounds like this. So you notice a couple things. One, it's not as loud. That's because you're not really running two amps completely in parallel. One amp is getting the lower frequencies, one amp is getting the upper frequencies. So in terms of volume, it's really more like one amp. And two, you can hear that the top end is a lot more subdued because it's all going to the Fender, which is kind of has more of a rounded top end to it. And the low frequencies are going to the Soldano. If you're just running in balance mode, the Soldano is getting the upper frequencies too. And so you're getting a lot more brighter sound. And you can move the frequency around. So if a couple things. So if you move it, so if I go like this, basically this is throwing everything into the Fender. If I move it like this, everything basically ends up going into the Soldano. So we'll put that back down to about where it was. The other thing is you can invert the mode. So basically, right now, when you split, everything below this frequency is staying on the top line and everything above it is going into the bottom line. If I invert that, basically flips it so that now everything below 562 is going to the second line and everything above it ends up in the first one. So you can hear the difference. So in terms of the rest of the setup of this preset, I've got it set up so scenes A through D are that setting, just adding in the overdrive. So B adds in the Blues Breaker, C adds in the OD1, and D adds in both. So you can have a nice kind of thick. The other thing I did is E through H. What I ended up doing was, you can see I'm pumping up the gain on the amps themselves. But then the same thing with the overdrive pedals. So the difference is here's just the amps more lowered. And so H would be the most gain. So again, this crossover split, I find it interesting. It's a different way to do it. I think maybe if you were using really high gain amps, and again, wanted to keep that low end really tight and maybe a little cleaner, this would be a great way to do it. I don't tend to run amps with that much gain on them, but I will say one thing I like about this is it allows me to keep that bottom end kind of really tight. So it's especially nice if, say, I'm using, let's say right here, I got a little bit of gain, I'm hitting a blues breaker, I can use a humbucker in the neck without getting too muddy with it. So I like that a lot. I can use kind of a warmer neck pickup, and because I'm sending the low frequencies to that Soldano bright, the low end staying not as muddy as it would be if I was running them in parallel completely. So I switch it to just run balance. You can hear that big difference there. So I do like that a lot. I don't know how much I'll use this, honestly, but I think it's a powerful tool that you can play around with and see if you find something that works for you. So.